Okay, good evening, everybody. I have 7:05, so I've given people enough time, hopefully, to get logged on, and maybe some more will hop on as we go along. I'm Pastor Connor. It's my privilege to be with you for our third session of Male and Female, He Made Them, put on by Lutheran Family Service. So glad you're with us. Hopefully, also, you have seen that Lutheran Family Service is posting these webinars on their YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube and just put in Lutheran Family Service, no S on the end, so Lutheran Family Service, you'll find both these webinars and a whole host of other resources that they have on that page as well. And those are shareable. So I invite you not only to share them, but maybe to watch them again or even watch them with a friend or with your family. So I encourage you to do that. So we're going to be jumping in tonight, and you can see, let's see if I can get my screen to work. There we go. Our focus tonight is on cultivating the Christian identity. And like I mentioned, it's part 3 of our webinar series. I want to do just a brief review of where we've been. So in part number 1, we talked about the gift of identity. God gives us our identity, right? Male and female image bearers. And that is such a wonderful gift because it means we don't have to define ourselves. We don't have to invent ourselves. And that is incredibly liberating. So remember the example we used of the professor who assigns a paper with absolutely no parameters. All right, those parameters are actually helpful for us, the student, to write the paper because those parameters take the burden off of us, off the student, all right, and place them on the professor. But when the professor provides no parameters, he's shifting the burden onto you. So it's really key to understand. When it comes to identity, then, God takes the burden off of us and places it onto himself. He bears the burden of our identity. He defines us. And this webinar series, we're really aiming after, we're really emphasizing how he has defined us as male and female image bearers of God. All right, so that was our first session. Last week, Casey did a great job of really answering the question, how did we get here? She gave us some of the history, some of the key players, the key thinkers that kind of led us up to where we are with some of the thinking today. And she gave us a very helpful mental health perspective on this question of identity. So if you didn't watch last week's, it's like I mentioned, it's on the YouTube page for Lutheran Family Service. Highly encourage you to check that out. So in this session, we want to talk about how to cultivate, how to inculcate this given identity as male or female image bearer of God, as a redeemed creature of God, as one baptized into Christ. How do we cultivate this? How do we reinforce it? Now, I'm just going to begin to answer that question. There would be multiple webinars we would need to do to really flesh this out completely. We're going to begin to answer it tonight. So don't think the answer I'm going to give you, is a complete answer. It's a beginning to the answer. Now, there are a couple things we need to do up front before we can really answer this question, all right, about how we cultivate this identity. So we need to do this. We need to understand what sort of creature the human creature is. So this is this sort of foundational, what is it and what is it for sort of question. This is a question, actually, we as Christians, we need to get better at asking this sort of question. So this is what we might call a purpose or a teleology question. What is it and what is it for? Actually, doctors, ideally, do this, for instance, with the organs. What is this organ and what is it for? Right? What is its purpose? So if you can't answer those questions, you can't help the patient. And if you are the patient and your doctor can't answer that question, you don't want that doctor operating on you. No way, all right? So it's the question, what is it? What is it for? Very important question. And number 2, we need to respond to one of the underlying falsehoods regarding the human creature. One of the false claims or wrong answers to that first question that actually is just nearly ubiquitous in our culture. All right. So here we're going to be taking on one of the great assumptions that is largely unquestioned, even by Christians today. But it needs to be questioned because, well, to put it bluntly, it's wrong. All right, so C.S. Lewis said, well, at least these words have been attributed to C.S. Lewis. I haven't actually found them in print, but we'll go with it for now. He said this: the most dangerous ideas in a society are not the ones being argued, but the ones that are assumed. That sounds like something Lewis would say, so we'll just say he did. So here's the thing. We tonight are going to question a major idea that's being assumed today. Now, I'll give you a preview. Here's the assumption: humans are sexual beings. All right, so now we'll have a lot more to say about this in just a few minutes, but that's the assumption that's being largely unquestioned today. And like I said, it's wrong. So it's actually getting the what is the human person and what is he for? What is she for? It's getting that question wrong. So we're going to talk about that and about how to answer it right. And then we're going to talk about how to cultivate that Christian, or we might say Christian, identity. So let's address our first question. What sort of creature is the human creature? Now, in asking the question this way, I've already tipped the scales in a certain direction, because I want us to see foundationally that the human creature is a creature. So this is explanation to the first article of the Apostles' Creed sort of stuff. I believe that God has made me and all creatures, that he's given me my body and soul, eyes, ears, and all my members, my reason and my senses, all my senses, and still takes care of them. So as creatures, we are effects. We are contingent beings. Now, I know that may seem painfully basic, but this is exceedingly important when it comes to identity. In fact, it's the thing that people so often just they rush right past this in their exploration of human identity. And because they don't start right, they don't end right. So let's make sure we start right. We are creatures. And I'm really going to zero in on our createdness. We are created creatures. We are not randomly evolved sacks of cells. We are purposely and lovingly created creatures. So, what sort of creature is the human creature? Well, on the one hand, he's similar to the animals. I mean, scripture says both animals and humans have the breath of life in them. Animals and humans seem to share at least some sort of consciousness. But the human creature is surely distinct from the animals. In other words, the human creature is not merely a highly evolved primate because he bears the image of God, right? That's what makes him different. And no monkey can claim that. So he's not simply different in degree, he's different in kind. The animals may have some sort of consciousness, but they are not conscious of their consciousness like the human creature is. The animals know what they desire most, but they seem incapable of reflecting on what is most desirable. The human creature not only reflects on what is most desirable, but he writes books on it and gives webinars on it. So the human creature is a thinking thing. But he's surely more than that, more than just a mere thinking thing, because, I mean, there's often a large gap between what we know and what we do. For example, we all know that exercise and vegetables are good for us. That's no revelation to any of us. But how many of us exercise regularly and tend to our daily serving of vegetables, right? So it seems that the human creature, when you get right down to it, is a desiring thing. I think we could call the human creature a magnetized creature that is drawn to a north. So the human creature is oriented towards something, drawn towards something, aimed towards something. So something calls to our hearts. Something appeals to our yearnings. Something captivates our imaginations and pulls us toward it. Theologians and philosophers have called this our telos. It means goal or end. For our purposes, we're just going to call it our north, the thing toward which we are magnetically drawn, the thing that calls us beyond ourselves. So the human creature is a breath of life, image of God bearing, conscious of his consciousness, thinking and desiring creature, a creature aimed toward a telos, magnetized toward a north. And this is true for every one of us. There is this deep down longing within every single one of us. And it's a longing that's so incredibly difficult to put into words. But it is a longing that we seek to fill, and we do it in all kinds of different ways. And here's the thing, until we fill it, until we fill it with what it's created for, we will remain restless. So, for example, you can look through history and you can see people offering ways to fill this, right? Marx famously said it'd be filled when the proletariat overthrew the bourgeoisie, right? So Freud said sex would fulfill it, and Kinsey and Sanger took that idea and promulgated it widely, all right? And sorry, I was having this thought. I think I said that backwards with bourgeoisie and proletariat. Either way, Marx was all about economy and those in power being overthrown by those who didn't have it. Let's just put it that way. Okay, so then you have Freud pick it up with sex, and then you've got Kinsey and Sanger. They take it and they run with it. And you heard Casey last week talk about John Money, how he took it and promulgated it widely. And you got all kinds of modern day acolytes in this movement today, that they're proudly insisting that this deep longing can be filled through sexualizing the human identity. Then you have critical theorists, for example. They claim it can be filled by, they will use words like this: dismantling cis heteronormativity by denying the binary, dismantling the creational family, and empowering those they identify as oppressed. And then there are others who basically don't give heed to any of this, and they live basically just to satisfy the desires of their belly. But they are looking to fill that void. Everybody is, whether they clearly express it in a well-formulated worldview, or whether they simply just live to fill those desires. Everybody has the deep desire that's hard to put in words in the center of our being. We are a desiring creature, all right? So in that list that I rattled off there, in that list is that unquestioned assumption that has largely been accepted by our culture. And sadly, it's been accepted by many in the church today. So I kind of referenced it earlier, but it was this, right? That humans are sexual beings. And let me clarify the point I'm making here, because I don't want your mind automatically to jump to the sexualized LGBTQ alphabet that's so much in vogue today. We'll get there. That's a part of the conversation. Right now, I'm simply after the assumption that most people in our culture are making about the human person. See, this unquestioned assumption isn't merely claiming that sex is a part of the human experience. It's actually asserting that sex is everything. that expressing our sexual desires is our telos. It's our north. It's the thing toward which the human person is magnetized, the thing that must not be thwarted for a person to fully realize his purpose and to find contentment in his soul. So Linda Bartlett, she writes the book, The Failure of Sex Education in the Church. She explains the We Are Sexual Beings lie this way. She actually says, here's what we're actually saying. She's saying sexuality, so this is what, when this assumption, we are sexual beings, she's going to flesh this out. What is it actually saying? She says, look, here's what it's actually saying. Sexuality is our entire selves. It influences us in every way and encompasses everything. So it influences politics and academia and journalism and educational psychology and curricula, just plain old psychology. It includes psychiatry, on and on and on and on. Yes, it even influences therapy, right? So I suspect you've heard speak of what's called the affirmation-only approach to therapy, right? So clients must be affirmed in their sexualized identity because to question it is to question their being, their purpose, their identity. And this is one of the reasons that Lutheran Family Service is making a concerted effort to challenge this false ideology, what I'm calling a false north. So here's what I want to do for the next several minutes. I want to show you just the tip of the iceberg, some of the ways that we are sexual beings, the ways that assumption, the way it's being pushed in every inch of our world. So I'm going to give you a few examples, but I'm only scratching the surface, all right? So, okay, last year, the federal government introduced a proposed policy that would effectively force foster parents to affirm gender ideology. Here's what was in the proposal, just one line out of it. To be considered a safe and appropriate placement, a provider is expected to utilize the child's identified pronouns, chosen name, and allow the child to dress in an age-appropriate manner that the child believes reflects their self-identified gender identity and expression. Just process that for a minute. That was the proposal. Now, I don't know where it stands right now. I don't know if it's been passed yet, but I know it was proposed just last fall. But here's my question. So this is aimed at foster parents. Ask yourself, do you really think if this gets passed, it's going to stop with foster parents? Really? I don't think so. We already have a few extreme cases in America of parents losing custody of their children for refusing to endorse gender ideology. Let me give you a few more. You actually have several states now that are mandating LGBTQ ideology and history be taught in schools. School libraries and public libraries proudly display their LGBTQ affirming books, or even just their highly sexualized and suggestive books. I mean, try this sometime. Just walk through a school's book fair sometime. Just walk through. Just look at the titles. Look at the front covers. Stuff aimed at high schoolers and middle schoolers, even elementary kids. Try not to be shocked by the titles. It's shocking. The stuff is so in your face. The book publisher Scholastic enthusiastically shares their Read with Pride resource list. This is like a whole multi-page booklet, dozens and dozens of LGBTQ celebrating books. And it's all driven by the we are sexual beings assumption. It's all, that's what underlies all of it. Sex education curricula in America, much of which is produced by SICUS. Maybe you've heard of SICUS. Let me just real quick take an aside here. SICUS, and SICUS stands for Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, which sounds like a government agency, right? No, it's not. It just sounds like one. But SICUS, just as an aside for a minute, SICUS was formed by Mary Calderon. She was the first director of Planned Parenthood, with funds from Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy magazine, right? So psychus is one of, if not the most significant driving forces behind sex education in America. And it even partners with the United Nations, setting global sex education standards. I want to read to you just a few of their position statements on their website. Okay, here's what they write. Comprehensive sex education must be affirming and inclusive of diverse sexual orientations, gender identities, and expressions. They go on. Psychus believes that every woman, regardless of age or income, should have the right to obtain an abortion under safe, legal, affordable, easily accessible, confidential, and dignified conditions. So they're totally on board with abortion. Psychus believes that abortion counseling and services should be provided by professionals specially trained in the field. Psychus believes that it is unethical for any organization to use anti-abortion propaganda, misinformation, manipulation, or fear and shame tactics to dissuade women facing unintended pregnancies from exercising their right to choose. So, in other words, we don't want you discouraging them from getting an abortion. Don't give them any evidence about the living baby in their womb. Don't speak to them at all about the ability to welcome this child into the world or even offer this child for adoption. Nope, none of that. That's anti-abortion propaganda. And Psychus says this. Psychus believes that sexually explicit visual, printed, or online materials, what we would call pornography, can be valuable educational or personal aids when sensitively used in a manner appropriate to the viewer's age and developmental level. I don't know who determines that. Such materials can help reduce ignorance and confusion and contribute to a positive concept of sexuality while supporting the sexual rights of all. And just process that for a minute. What they're saying is porn is great. Porn should be available for anybody who wants it in an age-appropriate manner, right? And this is all in their encouraged sex education curricula, which is all throughout our country and pushed throughout the United Nations. All right, now, back to what I started with. Much of the sex ed curricula in America today pushes this, all right? So Casey shared this one last week, the gender unicorn, and I'm going to also mention the genderbread person. But the gender unicorn, right? You've seen this, saw this last week. Cartoon unicorn created by trans activists that breaks identity down into the following categories: gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, physically attracted to, and emotionally attracted to. Now, notice that language of sex assigned at birth. Here's what they're saying. Biology is meaningless, completely meaningless. Your body is completely meaningless in your identity. One's inner desires are supreme. And the genderbread person got similar categories, all right? Okay, going on. It's exceedingly common for our colleges to have entire departments dedicated to sexual orientation and gender identity studies. Let me show you. First, University of Iowa. They offer a BA in Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies. Here's what it says. Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies courses investigate a host of thorny social challenges and inspiring solutions to such problems, with a focus on gender and sexuality in their intersection with race and ethnicity, citizenship and borders, ability and disability, religion and spirituality, and more. In other words, gender and sexuality is the lens through which students are taught to see the world. How do gender and sex intersect with everything? How are gender and sex everything? So this is one of those, like, if you give a toddler a hammer, everything will be a nail to him moments. That's what's happening here. Gender and sex is the hammer, and everything else is the nail. Let's take a look at Iowa State. They have their women's and gender studies. Here's what they say. The Women's and Gender Studies program at Iowa State University, established in 1977, examines issues relevant to social identities such as gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, and age. Through coursework, research initiatives, and community outreach, We engage in ways to challenge existing systems of knowledge and forge new scholarship based on the centrality of gender and other axes of power. Okay, so gender and sexuality and our identities. So get that. Gender and sexuality are identities. And these identities, then, they're supposed to help students challenge existing systems of knowledge, existing systems that don't have gender and sexuality at the center of identity. So here's what they're saying, all right? This is like saying such and such team is going to challenge last year's champion. Why would they do that? To defeat them and unseat them. That's what's happening here, all right? So it is common also for various groups to compile pride lists, right, of friendly colleges and shame lists for colleges that don't offer a full-throated affirmation of this assumption of we are sexual beings. Then you have Athlete Ally. They not only provide LGBTQ-friendly policy suggestions for college athletic departments, but they also publish and distribute pride and shame lists of schools based on their LGBTQ friendliness. Corporate Equity Index does the same thing for American businesses, right? We are sexual beings. It's everything. And it's nothing anymore for colleges and government documents and registration forms to leave a blank for a third gender. It's exceedingly common to have blanks for preferred pronouns, right? They, them, their, beaver, these, sie, zim, zir. Yeah. I mean, these are the new pronouns. And I don't know if you've seen what's been happening with our current administration's reworking of Title IX. And I've only read up a little bit on this. But from what I understand, it sounds like it makes it more likely that a person could be prosecuted for mispronouncing a person. It's process that. If you mispronoun a person, you could face a legal challenge. We have multiple reports I've read in multiple outlets about elementary ed teachers, elementary education, requiring their kids to address them as not Mr. or Mrs. or Ms., but mix, MX. That certainly seems confusing to me for children, but it's driven by the assumption we are sexual beings. You have drag story hours all over the country in our public libraries. You have entire church bodies embracing the we are sexual beings lie, going so far as to develop liturgies to celebrate same-sex unions and gender transitions. Entire liturgies to celebrate gender transitions. Maybe you've heard of Common Sense Media before. They actually, if you read the material, they give more favorable ratings and a more favorable ratings to encourage programs giving positive presentations of LGBTQ characters. So what they're doing is they're trying to push programs to present and celebrate what they call fully realized transgender characters. So programs and movies that portray transgenderism as a healthy option, that's what they're after, despite all the research that documents the deep psychological struggles transgender people face with or without surgical alteration. If they go against the research and the evidence and they present a fully realized transgender character, they're going to get a positive rating. But any program or movie that would dare to depict characters afflicted by this disorder, like, for example, if they desire freedom from it and they depict that honestly, they get downgraded. They get rated poorly. All right? Those that celebrate mental confusion, those get a more positive rating from Common Sense Media. Maybe you've heard of Riley Gaines. Just listen to a podcast by her on issues, etc. So she's a 12-time All-American swimmer with 5 SEC titles at the University of Kentucky. She actually has a book coming out soon called Swimming Against the Current, Fighting for Common Sense in a World That's Lost Its Mind. So watch for that book by Riley Gaines. But okay, So long story short, she ends up swimming against a transgender athlete. Will Thomas is his name, but he chooses to go by Leah. This happens in the national 200 freestyle race. So I'm listening to this interview with Riley, and here's what she has to say. She says this is after the race. They actually end in a tie, which is very rare in swimming, but it's a tie. She says, we go behind the awards podium where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself. Of course, Thomas towering over me, and he says, great job, you two, but you tied. We only have one trophy. We're going to give the trophy to Leah, 12-time All-American swimmer Riley Gaines. She is talking about this on issues, etc. But she goes on here and she says, I asked the dreaded question. She says, I asked the dreaded question to the official, which is, why are you so adamant on giving the trophy to the man in the women's 200 free, even though we had the same exact time? Why are you so insistent on giving it to him and not to me? And she says, well, I actually appreciate their honesty, because he looked at me and he said, well, I'm sorry, Riley, but we've been advised as an organization that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy is in Leah's hands. Yeah, we are sexual beings. That's what's driving this. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, just barely scratching it. For our purposes, what we want to see is how the world is prodding us to answer the question, what is the human person and what is he for? The world says the human person is a sexual being, and to be fully human, he, she, question mark, must affirm and embrace a sexualized identity. Okay, I don't know how else to say it. This is the message of our culture, all right? This is the way they're answering, what is the human person? Now, if we had some more time, we could expand upon what Casey talked about last week, because she does a great job of helping to explain how we got here. So if you want a little bit more information on how did we get here, so I'm basically describing what things are like now that we are here, but Casey did a great job talking about last week how we got here. So I encourage you to watch that one if you haven't. But for now, what I want to say loud and clear is humans are not sexual beings. Now, yes, obviously, sex is a part of the human experience. I mean, it even has the blessing of God within the marriage of husband and wife, right? For the purpose of a one flesh union and for the blessing God gives in procreation. But this is not the essence of being human. I mean, if this was the essence of being human, then we'd be forced to say that Jesus was somehow less than human for not engaging in the sexual act. Further, we would insinuate that celibate singles are somehow subhuman in their celibacy. So we are making the bold assertion that the north modern man is offering is not our true north, that we are sexual beings north. It's a false north. As such, it will not bring us happiness. It will not bring us the fullness that the world says it's going to bring. It just won't happen. Okay, so all of that took me a while, but all of that is build up to this. All of that is showing us that the human person, the human creature, is a religious creature. So these deep longings are religious longings. And why do I say that? Because they are longings for what? So it's not just about sex. It's about fulfillment. That's the argument, that this is the thing that's going to bring fulfillment, that this is the thing that's going to bring wholeness, that this is the thing that's going to bring happiness. That's what they're aiming after. That is a religious yearning. So what we're saying is, as a religious creature, we are yearning for something that calls us beyond ourselves, something bigger than ourselves. We have a need, a deep-seated need to make something our ultimate, something our north, something to give our lives to. Or we could put it this way. we need something to worship. So let me make this a little bit stronger. We will worship something. So we can put it this way. The human creature is a worshiping creature. So this is the answer to our question, what is the human creature and what is he for? He is a worshiping creature, and he will find his deepest purpose and deepest joy in worshiping and knowing his creator. Now, I want you to appreciate how significant this statement is. The thing that should be permeating our world is not we are sexual beings, but we are religious, worshiping creatures. So you take everything we discovered and you run, we are religious, worshiping creatures through it. Okay, so that's what we're saying. Further, what we need to appreciate then, because we're going to talk about cultivating the Christian identity, is worship is shaped by its liturgies. These liturgies tell a story. They tell us what the good life is, what the goal of life is, what the telos of life is. They show us the way the human creature should go. And you may not realize it, but once I tell you this, hopefully it opens your eyes to it. But we live in an ocean of liturgies, right? My body, my choice. That's a liturgy. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's a liturgy. Follow the science. Love is love. No human is illegal. Climate action now. Invest in communities, not cops. Racial justice now. You've heard all of those things. Those are liturgies. Or maybe I should take this from a different perspective. Make America great again. That's a liturgy. Build the wall. That's a liturgy. Take back our country. That's a liturgy. Law and order. That's a liturgy. They're all liturgies. They're all liturgies trying to shape your loves. Liturgies trying to direct you toward a north. They aren't merely communicating information. They're trying to shape your desires. So they're not saying simply know these things. No, they're saying love these things. It's really important to see that. So what you need to know is this. You, me, all of us, we will pursue what we love. We will pursue what we love. You see, as religious creatures, as worshiping creatures, we are liturgical creatures. I don't think it's any accident that Christ is actually referred to as a liturgist in the book of Hebrews, multiple times, actually. Here's just one from Hebrews chapter 8. We have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister, literally liturgist, liturgia, in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. Okay, so I know it's translated a minister in English, but it's liturgist in Greek. So Christ is the perfect human. He is the perfect liturgical being. And through his liturgical living and ministering, he calls us to him, to love him, and to pursue him. So we come to Christian worship and we encounter not merely information, but orientation. In other words, Christian worship orients you toward your true north, toward the thing, toward the being you were made for, the Lord Jesus Christ. So worship tells a story. It points in a direction. It plants the flag in our true north and says, pursue this, desire this, long for this, because this is what your heart truly desires. This is what will fill you up and never leave you empty. James Smith talks about this in his excellent book, You Are What You Love. So James Smith, You Are What You Love. Look that up. You should definitely read that. He says that Christian worship doesn't merely restore us, it restores us. It doesn't merely renew us, it re-narrates us. Now, do you understand what he's saying? He's saying that Christian worship magnetizes us toward our true north. It places us in a story and directs us toward a goal, toward a telos, toward a true happy, what I like to call happy, never ending. And through its liturgies, it changes us. But it's not something that happens all at once. It's something that happens over time, something that has to be repeated, recited, rehearsed, relived, and re-experienced. So I want to share something that my now in heaven partner pastor, he died here just a little over a year ago. Something Pastor Andrew Johnson wrote about this. I want you to hear what he had to say. It's so good, and he writes in his own unique and quirky way, but he's spot on. He says this: "The greatest gift my parents gave to me was getting my lazy rear end out of bed in order to attend Sunday school and worship. Every week we went. And every week, whether I knew it or not, the hymns, liturgies, creeds, and Bible stories etched themselves into my soul. It was as if I'd been bitten by a radioactive spider, and my superpowers were to receive and comprehend God's truth." You gotta love the way he says it. I love the way he puts it. But what I want you to remember is this: you live in a liturgical world. You live among worshiping creatures. You live, and your kids live, and your grandkids live in a world that's trying to magnetize all of you towards sex and identity, gender identity stuff, right? And toward other things like money and success and popularity and critical theory and like I mentioned, the sexual identity piece, and on and on and on and on. You live in a world that is calling for your desires, a world that is calling for your imagination, that's calling for your worship through its regular and repeated liturgies. And that's the world you live in. Now, it's not that everything the world offers is bad, right? It has plenty of bad things for sure. It's that what the world offers cannot satisfy our deepest yearnings and desires. Now, the world can awaken these deep desires. It just can't satisfy them. It can't fill them. I really want you to appreciate that point. It cannot fill them. C.S. Lewis pries into this in his book, Mere Christianity, another book. It's an old one, in the middle of the 20th century, but wow, it is like continually relevant. So here's what he writes: "Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that country and to help others do the same." All right, so that's just marvelous, right? Like I said, you need to read the whole book, but that's what he says there is just spot on. So here's our question then, okay? How will we make the main object of our life to press on to that country that Lewis talks about, to our true country, right? To our north, our true north. Well, by now you probably know the answer. Worship. Christian worship understands what kind of creature you are. That's so important. I mean, make sure you get that point, okay? Christian worship understands what kind of creature you are. It understands what your true north is, the Lord Jesus Christ and his everlasting kingdom. And Christian worship understands how to orient you and your children toward it. It does it through liturgy and creed and hymn and sermon and sacrament that are heard and rehearsed and relived over and over and over again. This is why Christian worship, it simply cannot be an occasional thing. Because you, remember, what are you? You are a desiring creature. And the world is ceaselessly serving up rival liturgies to hook your desires. I mean, it's really good at it, all right? If you want to see a little more on this, watch the webinar I did a while back for Lutheran Family Service on screens, on the individualized screens and digital media. Talk about having liturgies to try to hook our desires. That's a webinar you should watch. Or if you want to email me and ask questions about it, I'd be happy to present at your church on that. But nonetheless, I want you to appreciate that this is happening in the world, setting up these rival liturgies to hook your desires, to entice your desires, to awaken your desires. But I want you to hear me. It cannot satisfy your desires. It can certainly satisfy certain base desires. I mean, C.S. Lewis made that explicitly clear. But you have deeper desires in you that the world simply cannot satisfy. So Lewis describes it as basically seeing the freshness of the morning, but not being made fresh by it. So I want you to imagine with me just for a moment. Just imagine one of those crisp, still, clear winter mornings, right? When winter has frozen itself on the branches of every tree, on the barbs of every wired fence, on the blade of every shoot of grass, and you're standing there, you're just gazing in this awed silence at the shining beauty of it all. And you have this deep yearning in you to join with it, to be somehow united with this enchanted beauty. So Lewis writes about this. Here's what he says. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see. You see, the world can awaken these deep longings, but it cannot satisfy them. And that's where Christian worship comes in, because Christian worship tells the story of how we will mingle with all these splendors. Lewis puts it this way: but all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in. That's really profound. You can meditate on that for a while. So this is the story that Christian worship is telling. We will be united with the source of beauty, God himself. We will live with him and reign with him and enjoy him and his splendors, which are going to permeate the entire creation forever. So this is why we have texts like this in the scriptures. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. See, that's the invitation to worship, the invitation to orientation toward the Lord and his everlasting splendors, splendors that through the work of Christ, we are going to enjoy forever. So I really want all of you tonight, and those of you who watch this later, to appreciate that invitation, because that invitation is for you. It's for your kids, it's for your grandkids, it's for your neighbors, it's for your communities. We are worshiping creatures. Our desires will be magnetized toward true north, the Lord Jesus Christ. So how do we cultivate the Christian identity? Well, like I mentioned earlier, there are more components to this answer, right? Things like truth talk and habits, which would take a couple more webinars to cover. But for tonight, how do we start this process? Christian worship. Regular, faithful, consistent Christian worship. It will magnetize you toward your true north, the Lord Jesus Christ. So come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. Okay, that's where we're going to stop. And here's what I want to do now. I'm going to open up the chat. Certainly, you're welcome to ask questions. But what I would really like, if you would be willing to shoot me a one thing. And by that, I mean, tell me one thing that stands out to you from tonight, or one thing that you can take home with you, one thing you can share with a friend. Someone give me one thing that you'll take away from tonight. So I'll let you maybe type that in your chat, give you a minute to think about it. But hopefully there's one thing you can take with you. And as you're doing that, just a reminder on kind of what I'm doing with this one thing. I do this every Sunday at my congregation. We do this in our devotional practice with my family. It's a great tool for facilitating conversation. So one thing that you can take with you from tonight. So go ahead and someone shoot a one thing after me. Well, either you're all typing furiously and typing up a short novel of one thing, or I've simply spoken at you and your brain is simply unable to process at this point. I'll give you a couple more minutes, and maybe you have no one thing. Oh, we say I'm going to use the question and answer. We naturally seek out things to worship. God is the right object of our worship. Thank you, Heidi. You're spot on. Absolutely. We are worshiping creatures. We will worship something. Oh, great. So Lisa, thank you. You've made it clear how to address these issues with others. Great. That's hopefully helpful. I want us to appreciate the nature of Christian worship, of what's happening over the long term. That's important. Do we have to remember that God is always in control? Oh, absolutely. I think you're spot on. He's always in control. And this is actually one of the great sources of anxiety in the human person, is when we think that somehow it should be in our control, right? That somehow we're supposed to be able to control it. What happens too often is we try to wrest control from God, don't we? And what we discover is we're not God. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling when we think that we have to be in control and we're not, because there are very few things ultimately that we have control over in this world. And the sooner we recognize that, the better. Someone once put it this way, and I know this is easier said than done, so this is kind of tongue in cheek, but hope you appreciate the point. When we go to bed at night, we can give all of our fears and concerns to the Lord, because he's going to be up all night anyway. There's no need for all of us to stay up, right? So give it to the Lord. He's up all night. Oh, yes, it's scary what is happening, Jack, you say, but it helps to remember that God is still in control. Absolutely. Let me offer a resource to you just because that reminds me of it. So our family, the Connor family, we subscribe to a service called World Watch, which is a daily 10-minute news program that's put out. It's aimed at school-age children through elementary through high school, but it's great for the whole family. It's from World News Group, explicitly a Christian approach to telling the news. But they always end every program with these words: "Whatever the news, the purpose of the Lord will stand." And that gets after, Jack, your comment about it being scary when we're not in control. Remember that God is, and most certainly he is. Okay, another one says, we will worship something, so place God as our object of worship, not those things in the world. Absolutely. Thank you. Lisa, the liturgy has always been my source of comfort. I didn't always know why. You made it clear how the Lord works. Thank you. That is excellent. As a pastor, the liturgy is a source of comfort for me too, not just for me as an individual, but it's a source of comfort for me in this way. Even if I totally bombed a sermon, that it's no one understands what I said, or it just didn't connect with anybody, that liturgy, which has been in the church for generation upon generation, it clearly presents Christ. It is designed to bring Christ in front of you and to set him before you as your highest desire and to teach you how to orient your desires toward him. So it's a rich, rich blessing to our church. And I pray all of us can appreciate why it's so important. Like I said, even if the preacher is no good, or even if we totally bomb it, that liturgy is there to ensure that Christ is presented to you. So thank you, Lisa. All right, anybody else have a one thing? I'll give you just a minute, but I certainly appreciate your comments. I always appreciate feedback. I hope you're able to take this and take one thing into your conversation tomorrow, into your conversation with your friends or family. And that maybe also once Andy gets this put on YouTube, which he'll have done probably the next day or so, that you're able to share it with friends, or maybe even set up a watch party just to watch it together with them, because I think that could be a really meaningful thing. Okay, I'm looking at the time, 8:01, and I'm not seeing anything else pop up here. I don't want to cut anybody off, but oh, here we go. Lisa says, as a paramedic, I've been with people taking their last breaths. I always resorted to the things I knew. Absolutely, right? And how important it is to make sure the things we know are true, right? And that they're the things that we need to know. You'd hate to have your last moments be filled with some inane something you saw on TV or TikTok or something. I mean, if that's what's in your mind in your last moments, that would be a tragedy. But to have the words of the liturgy, Lord have mercy, or the peace of the Lord be with you, or all these sorts of rich words that are just presenting Scripture and Christ to us, and have those in our hearts and on our lips. What a blessing that is to all people. So I pray that all of us will have those words on our lips and in our hearts. Oh, good. Another paramedic. I totally agree. How about that? I got two paramedics. Fantastic. Absolutely. And I'm not a paramedic, so you have been in more of these situations than I've been, but I've been in the ER multiple times for those last moments in a person's life. And to be able to have at the ready the words of Christ, or the summarized words that come out through the liturgy, I will forever appreciate that, because those words are true and they bring the comfort that a person truly needs, especially at those moments. So fantastic. Love it. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful comments. My encouragement is, please take your one thing and tell at least one person. Take your one thing and tell at least one person. And if you tell more than that, fantastic. But do that today, and do that after every worship. Take one thing and tell one person. I really believe that is a great strategy for evangelism, because you can do that. You don't have to have any complicated formula or certain method. You just have to remember one thing. And I know you can do that. And I pray that everyone in the church would embrace that idea of taking one thing to at least one person every week. And I fully believe that God would bless that, and we would see great things in the church and in our culture. So, okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to find the stop button and sign off. Join us again next week. I'll be back. And then the week after, Casey will be back. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.